Hello, and welcome to the webinar where we will talk about reality and myths about Vedic astrology. My name is Aman, and I am the founder of AstroSattva. I provide astrology consultancy as well as I teach astrology to interested students. So, before we talk about the myths and reality of Vedic astrology, first let's understand what actually astrology is. Most of us understand and think that astrology is the stream where we can find out the future, the events that lies in the future for us, and most of the time we actually misinterpret the overall subject. That astrology can tell us that what lies for us in job, what lies for us in finances, what lies for us in the upcoming time, and what kind of time we are going to have, whether there will be happy moments, sad moments, we'll be happy, we'll be having some issues in the coming time, and what not. Whereas the reality is that astrology is that light which can guide us towards self-realization. And most of the time you might have heard that people talk in the way that they think they have a question that all these planets, these planetary bodies, they are way far away from Earth, and how can they have effect on humans? How can they affect on us? And from that point onwards, actually the confusion arises, the doubt arises. And if we just, for a fraction of a second, have a slight shift in the thought process and we just think in a way that these planets, they are not outside but they are inside us, and the entire Brahmand, the entire universe is actually inside us. If we can just for a second think in those lines, that actually will help us understand astrology in a better way. And when we say that planets are inside us, what actually we mean by that? There are several emotions, there are several thoughts that go around in us. And the kind of thoughts that we have inside us, we define them with a specific name. The positive thoughts, for example, the positive thoughts, we name it as Jupiter or Brihaspati. The negative thoughts, we call it as Rahu or the northern node of the moon. And similarly, the other several emotions, the emotion or the thought process of royal nature, we call it as Sun. So our thoughts, they definitely will have effect on us, they impact on us. And depending on our thinking process, our thought process, how we react to a specific situation, that definitely can impact our future. So it's just a matter of how we understand things, how we understand the entire concept of astrology. That really helps us move forward in a right direction. So the outer planets, they might have impact on you or not, but your thoughts definitely will. So the entire universe is inside us, the universe of our thoughts, the universe of our thinking process, our emotions. They impact our lives. And our present actions, they have their effect on the upcoming time. And that's what we call karma theory, our karmas. What we do today, what we do now is definitely going to impact in the coming time. Similarly, whatever we have done in the past is definitely having its impact on our present, our today. Current scenario, current time, current situations that we are going through are actually the result of our past deeds. So we do good deeds now in current time will definitely have would result in the upcoming time. So the first point, where the starting point actually, the understanding about astrology, if that starts improving, definitely we will understand this overall subject in a better way, and all the myths will definitely go away. So there are a couple of myths going around in Vedic astrology, where a couple of yogas are talked about that if so and so planet is conjunct, this is what is going to be. If so and so planet is placed in so and so house or sign, this is what is going to be. So, out of those several myths that are there, because of the limitation of the time of the webinar, I will talk about a couple of important points, important myths. I will call them myths because they create a lot of confusion in mind, and those people who do astrological consultancy or go to the astrologers for getting the consultancy or the advice, they will better correlate to these things, these myths, or the contradictions coming out of these statements that are there. For example, Kal Sarpa Dosh. For example, Mangalik Dosh. For example, Sadesati Dosh. And all these statements, all these yogas, they actually need to be understood first. And there are many more. So, I will just talk about primarily on the two yogas or two doshas, we can say, the Kal Sarpa Dosh and the Mangalik Dosh. So, the person who goes to the astrologer for some sort of advice, he or she might be in distress, might be in some trouble, and he actually wants the solution for that problem. And if not solution, at least the way forward by performing some sort of remedies or by doing some sort of good actions. How can he or she come out of that problem? So, astrologer's task is actually to guide the person accordingly, and should not be further demotivating the client, either by creating false hopes or further frightening the client. So, fear or greed, that should always be avoided by the person who is going to get the advice and the person who is advising. So, we start with the Kal Sarpa Dosh. What actually Kal Sarpa Yoga is, or Kal Sarpa Dosh is? That Kal Sarpa Yoga or Kal Sarpa Dosh is a malefic astrological combination of planets in a person's birth chart, which has detrimental effect. A person is said to have Kal Sarpa Dosh when all the 7 planets in his birth chart are placed between Rahu and Ketu. We will take it up with an example, and we'll see that how to identify whether a particular horoscope has a Kal Sarpa Dosh or not. And majority of the astrologers, they understand this concept. And even the clients who regularly visit astrologers, they also understand this identification of Kal Sarpa Dosh in a horoscope. But what actually we need to understand is that the specific combination or specific placement of planets that define the Kal Sarpa Dosh may be there in multiple horoscopes. But is it really giving any sort of trouble to the native, to different life areas of the person? That identification, the understanding of that identification is really important. And the examples actually will make it further clear. Like over here, we have 2 different horoscopes on screen. The case number 1 is of a native born on 8th April 1973. And the case number 2 is of a native born on 12th March 1973. Now, in the first case, in the first chart, we clearly see that all the planets, all the 7 planets are between Rahu and Ketu. We have to look anti-clockwise. So, Rahu is 17 degrees 59 minutes, and all the planets are in the signs ahead of the sign where Rahu is placed. Rahu is placed in Sagittarius, and all other planets are placed in Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, Aries or Taurus. So this sort of placement is termed as a Kalsarpa dosh. And if we look at the second horoscope, almost same situation is there, almost similar situation I would say is there. That Rahu is of 20 degrees 52 minutes and Mars, even though in Sagittarius, but is of 25 degrees 55 minutes. So it is moving towards Capricorn. Mars is moving towards Capricorn. So that is why Mars is also between Rahu and Ketu, and all other are definitely between Rahu and Ketu. So by looking at these two horoscopes, if someone says that both of these natives will have same impact in their life because of the Kalsarpa dosh, will that statement be correct? We have to identify with the help of principles that can be applied on any chart. And these principles actually I teach in my courses to all the students who come to me to learn the astrology. So this being the Sagittarius ascendant horoscope, Moon becomes the most malefic planet because the Mool Trikona sign of Moon falls in the 8th house. And Rahu Ketu, we already understand that are malefic. So because we are talking about Kalsarpa dosh, we will primarily focus on Rahu and Ketu's influence on a specific horoscope. So if we look at the first horoscope, the native who born on 8th of April 1973, the sign Sagittarius rises in the ascendant at 7 degrees 48 minutes. And Rahu Ketu are of 17 degrees 59 minutes. So they are far away from the most effective point of the horoscope. The degree rising in the ascendant, we call it the most effective point. This is the systems approach terminology that I use, and all thanks to Professor V.K. Chaudhary, who was my guru, and I have learnt in the direct guidance of Professor V.K. Chaudhary, and that's what I further teach to the students. So as per systems approach astrology, most effective point of this horoscope is 7 degrees 48 minutes. So any planet placed closer to these MEP, these degrees, will have major impact on the house, on that specific sign. Now here, Rahu and Ketu are far away from the MEP. The impact is more when the degree of the planet is within the 5 degree range. Now the 17 degrees 59 minutes of Rahu means is closer to 18 degrees and it's far away from the MEP. So Rahu and Ketu are not giving any sort of trouble in the horoscope because Rahu will have its 9th and 5th aspect. But in the 5th aspect and 9th aspect there are no planets to Rahu, and Ketu will have its 9th aspect to the Mercury, whereas the longitudinal difference is more than 5 degrees. So Ketu's impact on Mercury is way less. So in this particular scenario, where Rahu and Ketu are not giving any sort of trouble, this Kalsarpa dosh, the so-called Kalsarpa dosh in this specific horoscope will not cause any harm to the native. Whereas in the second chart, if we look, the MEP of the horoscope is close to 20 degrees, 19 degrees 57 minutes. And Rahu Ketu are of 20 degrees 52 minutes. So they are placed within range of 1 degree. So the MEP affliction is definitely there in this horoscope, and when the MEP affliction comes from Rahu Ketu in any horoscope, 6 houses get impacted negatively. So if I can mark the afflictions over here, Rahu is impacting the ascendant because Rahu is placed at the MEP of the ascendant. Rahu is giving its 5th aspect to the 5th house. Rahu is giving its 9th aspect to the 9th house. Ketu is giving its 5th aspect to the 11th house, and Ketu is giving its 9th aspect to the 3rd house. And at the same time, Ketu is afflicting Venus because Ketu is 20 degrees 52 minutes, Venus is 20 degrees 22 minutes. So the exact affliction is coming on Venus from Ketu. So here Rahu Ketu are giving various problems. So first house, the ascendant is afflicted, the third house is afflicted, 11th house is afflicted, 5th, 7th as well as 9th. So all these 6 houses are under the impact of Rahu and Ketu. So this sort of trouble whenever is there in the horoscope, then you can say that yes, now Rahu and Ketu are troubling. And this specific combination has nothing to do with other planets being placed between Rahu and Ketu. This can happen in any horoscope. So now, by looking at these two horoscopes in comparison to each other, we can understand the fact that clearly saying or generalizing a concept that when all the planets come between Rahu and Ketu, they would cause trouble to the native, that's not 100% correct. Now, if we come back to the first horoscope, the problem to this native will not be coming from Rahu Ketu because that's not depicted in the natal chart. Still, the person will have troubles with respect to entrepreneurship, with respect to communication, because the third lord Saturn is placed in the house of disputes and under the exact affliction of most malefic planet Moon, the 8th lord. Because Moon is of 22 degrees, Saturn is 22 degrees, Saturn is badly placed in the 6th house under the impact of Moon. So this sort of problem, this sort of affliction will definitely give issues or challenges to the native's entrepreneurship, his communication, his initiatives in the life. Whereas Rahu and Ketu are directly not giving any harm in this horoscope. But in this case, in the second case, the affliction from Moon to Saturn is not there. Yes, Saturn is placed in the 6th house, in the bad house, is in the state of weakness because of its bad placement. And because Saturn is weak and Saturn is the dispositor of all the planets which are placed in the Mool Trigona sign of Saturn. So Venus and Sun are further weak. Third house is completely destroyed by Ketu. Venus is afflicted by Ketu. So multiple problems will be there to this native. So students, when they learn the principles and when they learn to apply the principles in the horoscope, they can pinpointedly find out what actually is the cause of the problem in the native's life. The diagnosis actually is the most important point. The first point is the diagnosis. After that, you can suggest the remedy, suggest the solutions for that problem. Now, whatever planet is giving affliction in the chart, that needs to be pacified. That is the negative emotion that is overpowering the native. Whatever favorable planet is under the problem, like in this case, in the second example, the Venus is under affliction. So that is the favorable planet, the favorable emotion, the general significator of wife, Venus. In this case, the 11th lord, because Venus Mool Trikona sign falls in the 11th house. So that is under the affliction of Ketu. The income, friendship, elders in the life, all the females in the life, the native will have trouble with them. So he needs to work on that negative trait of his or her to overcome all such issues. So now if we move on to the second myth that we have, that Mangalik dosha. A Mangal dosha or Kuja dosha is the combination in the birth chart or horoscope where Mars is placed in the 2nd house, 4th, 7th, 8th or 12th house from ascendant. A person with Mangalik dosha in his natal chart is called Mangalik. Now if we go by this statement that the placement of Mangal, just the placement, mere placement of Mars in 2nd, 4th, 7th, 8th or 12th house will make the person Manglik. In that way, majority of the people will be Manglik. But what the reality is? Again, if we look at two different horoscopes and we try to analyze the situation, in both of these horoscopes, Mars is placed, the Mangal is placed in the 4th house. And as per the statement, placement of Mars in the 4th house, the person will be called Manglik. Now the first example is Pisces ascendant horoscope. The Aries, the sign ruled by Mars, falls in the 2nd house. Mars becomes the most favorable planet for Pisces ascendant persons. The MEP of the horoscope is 4 degrees 30 minutes. Mars is placed at 8 degrees within the 5 degree range of MEP. And when Mars is placed in the 4th house, because Mars has 4th, 7th and 8th aspect, over here Mars is a favorable planet. So Mars will have its favorable impact on the 7th house, on the 10th house and on the 11th house. Mars is not unfavorable for Pisces ascendant person. We actually have to look at the functional nature of the planet. If we look at the general nature of the planet, Mars is termed as a cruel planet. Mars is termed as a malefic planet. But is the malefic trait the only trait of Mars? Mars is the significator of energy. Now, how can energy be termed as malefic if it's pushing the person towards extremes? Definitely it's going to be a negative trait. So in this example, Mars is giving its favorable impact on 4 houses, the house where it is placed, 7th house, 10th house as well as 11th house. And the impact of Mars is called negative in the native's marital life actually. And 7th house has, in this case, has favorable impact of Mars. So it's not going to be negative for the person. Whereas if we look at the second example, here this being the Virgo ascendant horoscope, the Mool Trikona sign of Mars falls in the 8th house and Mars becomes the most malefic planet for this native and MEP is 11 degrees. Mars is placed at 11 degrees and it will have same impact on 7th house, 10th house and 11th house. But because here Mars is unfavorable, Mars will definitely have its negative influence on these houses where it is placed and where it is aspecting. So definitely in this particular case, Mars is unfavorable and we can say that yes, this chart is a Manglik chart, whereas the first chart is not a Manglik chart. So the functional nature of the planet will entirely change the situation. Whether that planet is functionally favorable to the native or unfavorable. Just its placement in a specific house will cause XYZ incidents in the life is not true. And this is what actually, these sort of principles actually are being taught in the course because they are coming from the systems approach principles derived by Professor V.K. Chaudhary. I am really thankful to him always. And all the students who are understanding, who are going through these courses, they all will be indebted to Professor Chaudhary and the stream that he has propounded. So, whoever is willing to learn systems approach principles or this astrology, this stream of astrology is most welcome. And if you have any sort of doubts, any sort of further queries, questions with regards to the system, with regards to these 2 pointers that we have discussed, you are most welcome. And I am not covering any examples of Sadesati because of the limitation of time. So as we have seen in the case of Kal Sarp Dosh as well as in the Manglik Dosh, that the generalization of any principle is not good, it never helps. there could be same or similar combination in multiple horoscopes, whereas there would be drastic difference in the ascendant, in the rising degree, in the placement of other planets, in the divisional charts. The dasha would be different. Not two horoscopes will be identical for two natives. There will definitely be some difference. Now, to counter it, you may say that what if two people are born at the same time, at the same place, exactly at the same time? But then, hypothetical scenarios could be there. One needs to bring out real situations, real life scenarios, that these are the two people who were born at the same time. And when we say same time, the time needs to be exact. Even if there is a slight change in the time of two different natives, that would make whole lot of difference in the divisional charts. When we further divide the D1, the Rashi chart, into further divisions. So the point I am trying to convey is that the principles, the generalized principles are good just to understand as a starting point of a specific subject. Whereas you cannot apply those general statements unanimously to all the horoscopes, to all the natives. And I would request everyone into this field of astrology who are providing consultancy that please, for God's sake, for your own sake, do not do the business of fear and greed. Guide the clients, guide the persons, natives, accordingly, judiciously. Our task is to find out the challenges as well as strengths in the horoscopes and then guide accordingly. Do not create any false hopes. Do not use these general principles in your own favor. Do not utterly frighten the client or create false hopes. Work on the principles. There is no need to remember thousands of yogas. You just need to remember few principles and you apply those principles on the horoscopes and you will have the answers. And in that case, when the client goes to hundreds or thousands of astrologers who are following the principles, all those will talk about the same outcomes, same principles, same results actually. Because a lot of times it happens that the client would say, I go to 10 astrologers and they will say 10 different things. That will happen when the general principles or general statements are talked about. The intuition comes into the picture. One would say as per his own understanding, another would say as per his own understanding. Whereas if you apply the principle properly, that's the first and foremost requirement, that you first understand principle yourself and then understand how to apply that principle in the horoscope. And when those 10 different astrologers, they apply the principles, they will say the same thing. A lot of times clients come to me and they say, I consulted you 7 years back and you said this. I do not remember that. I will have to look at the chart. I look at the chart and I say the same thing. Because I just apply the principle again after 7 years on the same chart, I will say the same thing. I need not to remember anything, that there are no manipulations involved. I do not remember. I need not to remember what did I say to this client, what did I say to that client. So the point is that anyone who understands the principles, who applies the principles, will always be safe, will always be confident, and that's what we teach. I hope this webinar would have been useful to you. If you have any doubts, any queries, you may contact me on my email ID, on my phone number, on my WhatsApp. Either way. So, thank you very much.